Hello everyone. In today's session, we will be seeing a concept called schema changing command or statement. Okay, so in database management system, when we have our database created and for some instance we want to have changes done to the basic structure of the schema, right? In such cases we are supposed to use this schema changing command, and this particular command follows data definition language syntax, right? To be very specific, the command name that belongs to this group used to change the schema is your alter statement, right? In any of your rdbms, if you consider, the information stored is in tabular format, right? Every relation represents an entity and each row in that table represents a individual entity from that entity type, right? So the columns over here represents the attributes of that entity. Now for changing the schema, you may be in need of adding a new information to this existing relation here commonly will be called as table. Okay, and the attributes will be called column, right? So now if I want to add a new attribute, or if I want to take out the existing attribute, or I want to redefine the attribute definition, as to say for example I want to change the data type, or I want to change the size of that particular variable, or I want to add certain constraints on it, or I want to remove certain constraints that are already defined on an attribute, all such changes that I am interested to do, I am able to do only if I am working with this alert command of database language. Okay, so now we are going to see in brief the syntax of alter and what all are the different operations and their syntaxes that can be employed to implement these schema changes, right? So first, the alter table can be used for adding a column. This is one of the operations, right? Similarly, it can be used for deleting the column. It can be used for modifying the column or redefining the column, right? Modify or redefine. Then I can go for adding constraints, right? If you remember, the constraints that I can have on the attributes could be, I want to make a attribute as primary key constraint, I want to make that as a referential integrity by applying a foreign key constraint on it, or I want to have the attribute of unique behavior, I want the attribute not to have a null value, so in that case I can add a not null constraint. So if I want an attribute to hold a default value, then I can mention default constraint on it, right? If I want the access to be really very fast, then I can create an index on the table, right? All such constraints that you can think of in rdbms can be implemented using your alter table, right? So in the practice session we are going to see how we are going to work with all these addition of constraints. Also, you can work with not only addition, you can also work with deletion of constraints, right? Supposedly you have added any of these constraints and no longer you are in need of this and you want to delete them, so you can go for deleting those constraints on the attributes. You can also go for renaming of your relation, right? That is your tables. If you want to rename, want to give a relevant name, you can change the existing name to the new name. You can also go for renaming of your columns or your attributes, right? So these are the various operations that you can implement using your alter, which basically are meant to make the changes on the schema. And when I say changes on schema, it means it is a permanent change that has occurred on the database, right? So now we will see the implementation of all these operations in detail using MySQL software, right? I'll be working on MySQL server. So to begin with, let me just check the databases that I have. So show databases would be the command for it. So let me now create a new database for the current work. So create database test 6 I would give. So database is created for me. Let me use that particular database. So use database name would be the command for it. Now let me just check if the database is empty. It has to be because only now I have created it. So how do I check? So I just have to run say show tables. No tables exist in it. So let me quickly create one table and add it to your test 6 database. Okay, so let me create a table by name workflow. So how do I create? I use create ddl statement, create table workflow, right? This would be the name of my table. Let me have start date varchar of 20. Don't worry about the types, I'm just giving them at this point so that I can show you how the definitions can be altered, right? Actually the start date should be of date type, but I am purposefully giving here varchar so that later on if I want to change the data type from varchar to date, how it can be changed, I'll show you that. Okay, so end date, let me put the correct data type for this. Then I have uh, project name, let it be of varchar. Okay, it be of varchar 25 size, and then let there be a team lead, which is again of varchar of say 20. Okay, these are the four attributes of my relation workflow. So every statement in MySQL ends with a semicolon. So now yes, the table is created now, right? So let me quickly describe this. Right, there are four attributes by name, start date, end date, project name and team lead with the data types and specifications given. Okay, so the third column says whether these attributes allow a null value or no, right? So all of these are going to allow the null values as of now because it is yes in all the rows here. Any of the keys assigned to it, no, hence no key specification is done. The default value is by default null specified, no other extra constraints are defined. So that is the description of the workflow table at this point in time. So first, let me just show you how do I change or change the data type name, right? Let me just see how I can redefine the start date and change its data type. Okay, so how do I do it? Let me use the alter command, alter table name I have to specify here, which is workflow for me, right? Workflow. Then modify modify what I am supposed to modify, the start date attribute, right? Start date, the attribute name which you want to change, right? And I want to change it to date, right? That's it. It doesn't take any size or anything other than the keyword date. So I just specify this and terminate my condition statement here. And if I just press enter, it would execute. And now if I describe the table, you can see now the start date would have been changed from varchar to date, right? So this is how you can modify your uh, attribute definition. Okay, so if I have to check with the general syntax, it would be general syntax to redefine. Okay, redefine the attribute. What would be the general syntax for that? It would be alter table name of your table name, whatever you have given. Okay, and then the keyword modify, then the column name on which the modification you want to do. Okay, then give the data type of your choice, and then if it takes, then give its size. This is optional. So for example, in our case, data type was date, so size is not mentioned for it. So this would be your general syntax for redefining the attribute. Okay, wherein alter table are keywords and modify is keyword, right? Table name will be of your table name with whatever you have in your database. Column name is the attribute name of that particular table. Data type of your choice, and if it accepts size, give it a size there. Okay. Next, now, how do I add a column to it, right? So let me just see. Now, there are only four attributes here. Let me add one more attribute to this table. How do I do that? Alter table workflow, right? Alter table is keyword, workflow is the table which I am working with. Okay. Alter table workflow, add the new attribute definition, what you want to add there. Okay, so now I would want to add workflow id, right? Workflow id, it is of which type I have to specify. Let me specify it to be of integer type. Okay, again here integer do not take the size, so that would be sufficient. So let me just press enter. Now it has been executed successfully. Now let me just describe the workflow. You can observe that now instead of 4 columns there would be 5 columns there, right? The fifth column is added over here, right? So this is how you can add a new attribute to your existing column, existing table. So what is the general syntax for that? For adding a new column, right? It would be alter table name, right? Add the column name of your choice that you want to add with its definition. A definition includes specifying the data types along with the size, right? So this would be the general syntax of an alter statement to add a new column. Okay, is that clear? Now let me just see, how can I add a constraint to this table? Say for example, I want to add primary key constraint on this particular workflow ID, right? How do I do it? Now see, alter table name is workflow, right? I want to add primary key, right? I want to add primary key on which attribute or column name? It is the workflow ID, right? So workflow ID, just use the column name as is. Okay, put semicolon, press enter, right? Now the query is executed successfully. Now let me see if that is reflecting in my description, right? If you can observe here in the key column, right now it is not displaying anything. Once I have added primary key, see the difference, right? The workflow ID is now added with the primary key constraint. Okay, now what if I don't want to make workflow ID as a primary key, rather I want to make project name as primary key? In that case I have to delete or drop the primary key constraint on the workflow, right? And then again redo the same thing, but when I redo, it has to be on the different column name, which is going to be project name and not workflow ID, right? So let us now see, how do I drop a primary key, right? So how do I drop? I use again alter table workflow, which is again the table name, as a drop primary key. Every relation can have only one primary key, so there is no need of indexing it. So once I say delete primary key, it is understood There is only one primary key and that has to be deleted. Okay, so let me just press enter. The query is executed successfully. Let me just now see the description. Right now, if you can observe here, the primary key value is now no longer existing, right? But you can observe one thing here. Before I made it as primary key, the workflow id, it was letting me to have a null value. The minute I made it as primary key, now null value can't be assigned to this. Even after dropping the primary key, this constraint is still existing. And if you intend that this should not be the case and your workflow ID should be taking a null value, then you have to modify this. Right? How do I modify this? Right? So that this workflow ID attribute can accept a null value. So again, follow this alter table workflow, right? Modify. What I'm going to modify? Workflow ID column I'm going to modify, and I'm retaining that particular type, right? This is mandatory. You cannot skip the type over here when you are modifying it, right? Retain the same thing, right? It was integer earlier. Now also I'm maintaining it as integer, but now I'm going to specify the constraint as null. That means the workflow ID should be accepting a null value. So now if I press enter, the query is executed successfully. Now if I describe, you can see here the workflow ID is now letting a null value to be entered for your workflow ID. Okay, now to quickly summarize the things, right? How do I add a primary key to the existing column, right? Adding primary key constraint, right? How do I add? For that, the syntax goes as alter table name, right? Add primary key to the column name on which you want to add, and semicolon, right? Similarly, if I want to delete or drop the primary key, drop primary key constraint, right? How do I do that? Again, I use the alter command, alter table name, right? I say drop primary key. Since there is only one primary key assigned to any relation, that single primary key will be dropped. So once you drop this primary key, you observed that the particular column still holds a not null constraint, which is inherently or implicitly put, right? So how do I remove that, right? Or I want to say that the particular column should be accepting a null value. In that case, so what do? I say alter table name, right? I say alter table name and then say modify, right? I say modify the column name, right? Then give the data type. If you do not want to change the data type at this instance, whatever is the older data type considered, the same data type you can take, or you can take an opportunity to change the data type as well at this point in time, right? And then give the null constraint on it. Then what will happen is it accepts the null value. Okay, so this is how we can work with the primary key constraint and assigning a null constraint on the attribute. Okay, now if I want to rename, going further, if I want to rename certain columns of my table, right? How do I do that? Alter table workflow, right? I want to rename a column, so I use the keyword rename column, and then I have to specify the column name. Say I want to rename PR name to complete thing, that is project project underscore name. This is a proper naming convention where the attributes, once we look at it, clearly tells what it is, right? So the syntax goes as alter table, table name, rename column, old column name to new column name. Okay, that's it. So what will happen is the older name, PR name, is now replaced with your project name, and this change is permanent. Okay, because you're changing the schema over here. So the query is successfully executed. Now if I describe the workflow, you can observe here now the PR name is changed to project name, right? Similarly, if I want to rename the table, right, the table itself, the whole table, so how do I do? We no longer use an alter statement here. We rather go for using a statement called rename table. Table name, old table name is workflow, right? And I want to change it to new workflow, new underscore workflow, right? The query is executed successfully now. Now, if I say describe workflow, right, it will say the table is not found because now workflow is now renamed, right? Or before doing that, let me just show you. Show tables. If I do, it should be now showing me the single table name, and the name is now changed to new workflow. You can observe here, right? So now whenever I want to describe, I should be telling or using the new name of the table, which is new workflow. Now this is how your renaming can be done. Okay, let me quickly summarize over here how to rename your tables or columns, right? First, to rename columns. What is the syntax? Alter table, table name, right? Alter table, table name, rename column, old column name. You have to specify here. 2 is the keyword again, and specify the new name that you want to assign, right? So in that case, the column with this name will get replaced with the new name, and that we have already observed. Now what if I want to rename the relation itself? Rename the table itself, table, or we call it as relation, right? What if I want to do this, right? So here we are going to use a rename command as rename table old name to new name. That's it. Okay, this is how we can go about with it. Now next, let me see how we can delete or drop a column from the table, right? So for that, again, alter table, new workflow, right? Drop column, correct? Drop column name. What is that particular column name which you want to drop? Say for example, I want to drop workflow ID or team lead, right? I don't want this particular column over here. So I just simply say drop column name. Query executed successfully. Now if I describe this, you can observe that team lead, this column is being taken off from your new workflow table. Right? Now, let us see how other specific commands can be added to each of your columns. Say, for example, I want to add unique constraint on the workflow ID. Right? So, how do I do it? Right? So, we go for using alter table new workflow, right? Add constraint Constraint name. See, this will act as an index whenever you are having multiple unique key constraints implied on different attributes. And whenever you want to drop them, you are going to use this constraint name to drop, right? So these constraint namings that we are going to use will act as identifiers whenever you want to drop the unique key constraints from the attributes. So this is optional, but it is best practice to use them, right? So it is always good to use. So I'm just showing you the complete syntax itself. So we say alter table, table name, add constraint. You give a constraint name to this particular unique key constraint. Right now I want to add unique constraint on workflow, right? So I'll give this name. Fine. Unique constraint. If you're not giving, then system will give automatically a id to it, and using that id you can drop it. I will show you what exactly happens. Now just observe when you are adding a constraint to it, right? So it says alter table new workflow, add constraint, constraint name, right? Which constraint you want to add? Unique. Unique is the constraint that you want to add, on which one you want to add it on workflow ID. Right? So if I now execute this, the query executed successfully. If you want to see the metadata of this, then you can type in show create table new workflow. You can observe here the unique key constraint is added on workflow, and it is identified by the constraint name unique workflow. Okay, so this we have to use whenever you want to drop the unique key constraint now from this table. Okay, is that clear? So now let me just show you the one without using the constraint name and how MySQL will allot the thing to this. Okay, so I'm going to use the same thing. So here I will not use the constraint name. So let me just take it out. Add constraint, add unique key constraint on, instead of workflow id I will add it on project name. Okay, so here what is the difference? You can check. I am not using the keyword constraint and constraint name. I am directly saying alter table new workflow, add unique constraint on a particular column. The query is executed successfully. You can now see that since I've not given the name to this constraint over project name, you can observe a default name is given, right? Unique key constraint project name. So usually what system does is the attribute name itself will be considered as the unique key constraint name here, right? So this was given by me explicitly. This is given by the system over here, right? Now how do I drop this unique key constraint? So now to drop that, we have to follow the syntax alter table uh, new workflow, right? I have to say drop index. Use this, right? Drop index. So I want to drop unique workflow, right? The one which I had specifically given, right? So if I do this, so what will happen? I press enter. Query executed successfully. Now if I see this, you can see here this particular workflow ID is now taken back. Now, if I describe this new workflow, right? Now, workflow ID no longer has got a unique key constraint. Only the project name, which second time I added, is available. Okay. So likewise, you can work with different constraints. So let me also show you certain other things as well, right? So for example, if I want to add a default value, right? So for example, my workflow id should not be null, right? I just want to give a default id, right, or default value to it, which is always set to 1. So anytime you want to give a specific thing, then or 999, the largest number I can give. And whenever an id is given to that work, then you can replace that larger number with the given number for the workflow id. So let me just show you how a default value can be set. As of now, the default values are all null for it, right? So now, to add a default value to workflow id, I am typing here alter table new workflow, right? New workflow. Um, and then say again use alter keyword, alter table name, again say alter the column name which you want to change, workflow id, right? Alter table name, alter column name, set default, right? Since it is an integer value, I give 999 as a default value it has to take. Okay, let me execute this query. Executed successfully. Now if I describe this, you can see here for the workflow, earlier it was null, now but default value is 999. Okay, so whenever I'm inserting values into this table, if I don't insert the value for workflow id, by default it will show 999. Okay, so let me just show you that. Insert into table, insert into new workflow. I want to specify only the values for start date, yeah, start date, end date, and to project name, right? I do not want to give any value for workflow id, right? So now I will specify the values as 22nd August 2021, to specify the dates in quote marks, and 22/09/2022 is the end date, right? And then project name is Ashwa. Oh, there is certain, okay, format. No, that is the default format I should be using, which is year, month, and day, right? So if I do this now, say I have, you can check here, I have not specified any value for workflow ID, right? Select star from new workflow. See, the default value is 999. If I insert another value also, right? So let me just change a few things here. I'm not going to change much of the things. So here does something like this. Oh, I've given an extra value here. Duplicate entry. Okay, since it is unique, I can't give that. Okay, all these checks are happening. You can observe it. Fine, now I have changed it. Now you can see if I select, then what does it say? Again, the default value is given over here, right? If you want to update, then you have to use an update command, which is from your DML statement, and update the workflow IDs as and when required. Okay, so this is how you can set your default values. Now if you don't want to set them, then how do I drop the default values? Then for that, alter table new workflow, right? To this, I have to say, how do I drop it? So alter table name, alter column name on which I have given workflow ID, right? Drop, drop default, right? Alter table name, alter the column name, drop default. So it executed successfully, right? So now if I say describe it, right? Let me just quickly type it here. Describe, describe new workflow, correct? The default value is taken off. Okay. So it is now back to null. You can observe here it was 999 and now after dropping it has again come back to null. Okay. So like this you can work with your default constraint also. Let me also quickly show you how to check the constraints. Okay. So for example, let me add a new column to this. Okay. Say alter table new workflow, add add, say for example, just randomly I'm taking age of integer type. Okay, so it has successfully executed. Now if I describe, it says age has been added over here, right? Now what if I want to restrict or put some constraints on this age attribute, that the age has to be, whenever the values are entered, it has to be greater than 18, right? So how do I check that? So that means whenever I'm setting any values, whenever I'm inserting any values in this table, the age column should always receive a value which is equal to or greater than 18, and not anything less than that should be thrown as a exception. Okay, so alter table new workflow, right? Add constraint check one. This is the name that I'm giving to this. Okay, check is the constraint, and what is that? It is imposed on the column name, and what exactly it says, the age, whenever a value is entered, it has to be greater than 18, right? So this is again done. So let me just see here. You can't observe any changes in this particular description when you do that. So let me just quickly insert certain values, right, into the, let me also give age, right? So let me make this 2 because it is unique. So let me say 12. If I enter, it should throw an error to me, right? What does it says? The field workflow. Oh, okay, I should also give the workflow ID here. Workflow doesn't have a default value now, so I have to specify this. So let me just give a project name. Workflow ID is going to be 1. Unknown column workflow. Oh, sorry, it has to be workflow ID. Check one constraint violated. Now you can see when I'm giving it as 12, it says check one is violated. That means it will never allow me to do this. Now I can give a value that is greater than 18. Then the query will be executed successfully, right? So any of the check constraint that you want to have on the columns, to have a restriction on the type, the values that are entered into it, you can go for using the check constraint, right? So how do I drop the check constraint? Is again alter table new workflow, right? Drop constraint, the name of that which I had given as check one. Query executed successfully. Now, if I want to add, you can see here, I can make it 12. The query gets executed successfully. That means it is accepting any value for the age even if it is under 18. Okay, so this is how you can work with your check constraint. Now let me also see how to add a foreign key constraint to the table. Right, for this it's mandatory that there has to be two tables that can exist. So let me create another table, create table project, right, with project name, right, as primary key, right, and I have some project manager, right. Let these be two things in my table, right. So there are two tables in my database, right, new workflow and project. Now new workflow has got a column called project name, which I want to make this to be referring to your um project table. Okay, so let me just try doing this. Alter table new workflow, right, alter table new workflow. I am now going to add a constraint by name fk1, okay, which is going to be a foreign key on project name. It is going to refer references which table, project table, on which column. Okay, I have done this, and then exactly is happening here is, oh yes, yes, so just see this, select star from new workflow, right. I have entered certain values in this, right. So whenever this dependent table has got values, right, and those values should be matching with the parent table that you are trying to refer to, right. So here the project name is referring to the column called project name in project table, which is going to act as a parent table here, right. So now the child table is having values and the parent table does not have any value. Okay, let me just show you that. Uh, project, right, it is empty. So what is happening is whenever you are trying to have certain modification done on the schema with after the population of data into the tables, then you'll have to take care of so many constraints, right. So one such constraint over here is that you should see that the referencing column is holding the values that are already present in the parent table on the column to which it is referring, right. So now this is the reason the syntax is working fine, but the internal logic, right, whatever we are trying to implement with this is going wrong. So what is the corrective measure that we are supposed to take here is we have to first delete these data, right. So delete from new workflow. That's it. I want to take off all the things, right? So all the entries are taken off. So, or else the other way is you have to enter these same names in the parent table primary key column. Okay, and then these can have a reference to them. Okay, but usually the schema changing statements is preferred to be executed before the database is populated with any data, so that such additional checks that are required to be made are avoided, right. Once the database is populated with data, we should not go for having frequent schema changes. Okay, so now the same query I'll run to add the foreign key. What it says, alter table name, add the constraint. This is the user defined name which I have given to the foreign key, which I'll be using during the dropping of this foreign key later if I do not want to have this, right? So again, the foreign key constraint on which column and references which table on which column, right? So that is the syntax. And then when I press enter, it says the query executes successfully. Right. So now if I have to describe the new workflow, right, you'll be able to see that a foreign key constraint is now added. Okay. If you want to have a look at more detailed information, then I'll have to say show create table new workflow. Right here it says this is a foreign key constraint that is added on this particular column, and which one it is referencing, the table and over the column on which the reference is made. All the details are given here. Now if I want to take out this foreign key, say for example I no longer wish to have this foreign key. Now how would I drop this? Then again the syntax goes as alter table new workflow, right? And I'm going to use drop command here. What am I going to drop? I'm going to drop my foreign key. So that key name I have to give fk underscore pr underscore name, right? This is the value which I have specified over here. If you do not specify, then a default name is given by your MySQL there. Now successfully the foreign key is dropped. To check that, you can see here there is no foreign key reference that is happening over here, right? So it was earlier showing here constraint, a foreign key. It was referring on which table. Now that information is not available. That clearly indicates that there is no foreign key references that is being made on other tables, right? So with this, I conclude the alter command details. That is how schema change can be done on the existing schemas. Okay. Thank you.